Today we're at the Museum of the Buffalo Soldier near downtown Houston. It is incredible. We are here in the weekend of Juneteenth, and they have activities all weekend. We've seen reenactments, we have experienced Civil War tents, and of course we've been inside the museum and all of their incredible exhibits dedicated to the military history of African Americans. I can't wait to share it with you. Without a doubt, this was one of my favorite things we did while visiting the city. This is a museum for history lovers. Everything here is real, including the art. The collection has been largely donated to the museum and lovingly arranged to communicate a story of military service that winds down through history. You can see the love and attention to detail the moment you arrive in the parking lot. And this museum doesn't stop at the Buffalo Soldiers. They preserve the legacy of military service of Black men and women in every branch of the military, down through every conflict and peacetime. This museum started as a passion project of Captain Paul Matthews, a Vietnam veteran and Houston native, who wanted to honor the military legacy of African Americans. He established the museum in 2001, largely out of his own personal collection as a military historian, and in 2012 moved the collection into this 1925 building that once served as the armory for the Houston Light Guards. The history of the Buffalo Soldiers begins during the Civil War, when they were initially referred to as the United States Colored Troops. The official count of Black men serving in the Union Army during this war, according to Army documentation, is 178,000. However, that number is likely much higher. Though the war began in 1861, the Bureau of Colored Troops was not formed until 1863, despite many units having already joined together. Once official record keeping began, records for Black troops weren't well maintained, with many names misspelled and whole lists of units lost entirely. The African American Civil War Memorial in Washington, D.C. puts the count closer to 209,000, and that still may be inaccurate. In addition to battling poor record keeping, there was a lack of definition of who should be recorded. Black men and women served in the Union Army in capacities outside of soldiers, such as cooks, camp laborers, scouts, and even nurses and doctors. Yet none of these names were written down. In fact, Harriet Tubman famously served as a nurse, cook, scout, and spy for the Army from 1862 to 1865, even though women weren't officially recorded as serving in the colored troops at all. We were fortunate enough to be visiting the Buffalo Soldiers National Museum the weekend of Juneteenth, where reenactments took place all day, and none other than Ms. Tubman herself was in attendance.
My name is Harriet. I'm one of the most sought after nurses in the whole Civil War. God didn't make no junk. That's why we're here today. We are all the unknown soldiers, because nobody knows about us. We are all the unknown soldiers, because nobody thinks it's worth studying about us. My mama's name was Green, Miss Green. My grandmama, she come over on the big ship, and if you would drain the big ocean, you'd see millions of boats. Her name be Modesty, but that not be her real name. But she taught us about the medicine. And the Native Americans, the Indians, taught us about the medicine. And my papa told us how to tell time by the sun.
All of the uniforms worn during the reenactment represent different ranks across different divisions. Each regiment had the option to create their own flag to fly above their troops in addition to the stars and stripes. Several sought out the skills of noted African-American artist and fellow soldier David Bustill Bowser, who created unique signature pieces to reflect the spirit of the men they represented. Bowser was born free in Philadelphia and was the grandson of Cyrus Bustill, one of the founding members of the Free African Society. He most notably painted the portraits of martyred abolitionist John Brown and President Abraham Lincoln. This specific portrait of Lincoln would go on to be featured on the $5 bill issued during the Reconstruction era. Try as I might, I could not find any direct photographs of the Reconstruction $5 bill. However, I did find this emergency Hawaiian bill from the 1930s, and if you look closely, I think that could be Bowser's Lincoln portrait at the center. The shading is slightly darker around the facial features. However, the pose and face are, in my opinion, incredibly similar, if not the same. If you compare it to a contemporary $5 bill, you'll immediately see the differences between the two Lincolns. Even if it's not the same portrait, I believe it's close enough that we have the overall impression of what that Reconstruction era bill may have looked like. David Bustill Bowser's Regimental Flags sought to portray Black men in heroic and even chivalrous roles. Here, you can see Black soldiers protecting Lady Columbia. She is the original personification of the United States that predates the Statue of Liberty. Columbia first appeared as a stand-in for America as early as 1738 and was considered a guide for George Washington himself in 1775. Our nation's capital is in the District of Columbia. In Bowser's flags, she is wearing a crown of laurels, symbolizing victory for these Black regiments. Across the top of this one, we read, "Rather die free men than live to be slaves." That line gives me chills. Arguably, no one in the Union Army had more at stake than these men. The final flag I'm going to share with you captures the fury these soldiers brought with them. In this one, a Black soldier is bayoneting a Confederate soldier who, notably, was holding the white flag of surrender. Across the top, we read, "Sic semper tyrannis," which is Latin for, "Thus always to tyrants." The phrase is most commonly associated with Brutus, who is said to have uttered this as he assassinated Julius Caesar in 44 BCE. The idea is that tyrants will always meet with violent ends at the hands of those they oppress. It became a rallying cry of the American Revolution and was memorialized on the state flag of Virginia. It is not hard to see why David Bustill Bowser found this historic phrase fitting for this moment in time. I personally take the inclusion of the white flag as a statement that this was a war to change mindsets. The Confederacy could not be allowed to merely surrender and withdraw to live as things were before. It would be overthrown entirely, and old mindsets would be eradicated. Without a doubt, it is a powerful image. In total, Bowser painted 11 flags. After the war, only 7 remained. They were photographed and sent to the Military Museum at West Point and displayed there until the 1940s, when an unknown individual threw them away. Sadly, I could only find 4 of those 7 to share with you here. But I'm glad to have found these and grateful we can appreciate Bowser's artistry and passion for his subjects. Now, let's be clear that what these soldiers did, joining the Union Army to fight for their own freedom, was illegal.
Does the Confederate Congress order that any black man caught in uniform was to be either executed or returned to slavery? Our captain is a white man. Any white man caught leading black soldiers was to be put to death as well for inciting servile insurrection. Now, I, as an officer and a black man, has broken every law in the land. So if I'm caught, I am dead on the spot. So there is no retreat. There is no running. My men will not run. We will either beat you or we will take you to the grave with us. And that is it. That hasn't changed even today.
The Confederates announced that they were going to execute black soldiers and the officers leading them, or re-enslave them. Lincoln announced that for every officer executed, he would execute one imprisoned Confederate officer, and for every black enlisted man enslaved, he would put one Confederate enlisted man to work at hard labor on government projects. And he had Robert E. Lee, his youngest son, in his prison camps at the time, and he was going to be first.
Oh my God.
The Confederates backed down.
No.
Inside the museum, they have this recruitment poster written by Frederick Douglass in 1863 after the Emancipation Proclamation. It was his firm belief that by allowing black men to serve in the military, politicians would be forced to grant them citizenship. I want to call your attention to the portion that reads, "We have seen what valor and heroism our brothers displayed at Port Hudson and Milliken's Bend." Port Hudson was the site of an epic siege of Confederate troops by the Union Army in Louisiana. The goal was control of the Mississippi Waterway, a vital pipeline of supplies to the Confederate Army and strategic location for the Union Navy. The siege involved the 1st and 3rd Louisiana Native Guard, 2 regiments of colored troops that were largely composed of recently freed slaves. Unfortunately, there were many white politicians in the Union who felt it was dangerous to arm black men, and that despite working to end slavery, black people were unfit for citizenship. They claimed black men would never pick up arms to defend their country, nor would they know what to do without proper military training. Many white soldiers in the Union Army refused to serve alongside black soldiers at all. But there were many white military commanders who gladly took charge of the all-black regiments and gave those recently freed slaves as much training as they possibly could in a very short amount of time. These men didn't always have full equipment or weapons, but they used whatever their hands could find to fight for their own freedom. The 1st and 3rd, despite insufficient training and having only a few weapons, were ultimately victorious against the more seasoned and better equipped Confederate Army. In my opinion, the aftermath of this siege speaks for itself. These black regiments destroyed the Confederate encampment, leading Abraham Lincoln to say of the river after their victory, "The Father of waters again goes unvexed to the sea." At Milliken's Bend, another supply depot on the river north of Port Hudson, the odds were even worse. Nearly all of these black regiments were freed slaves. They were not given uniforms. They were not provided with much training. Many were not even properly armed. On June 7, 1863, the Confederates breached the Union Army lines comprised of white regiments, and the fighting became so close it was reduced to hand-to-hand combat. The tide of victory seemed to be in favor of the Confederates. Once the Confederates reached the regiments of colored troops, however, they were quickly routed. The freed slaves fought with anything they could find, farm implements, even their bare hands, in a way no one had ever seen before. They were unmovable. You'll notice in these newspaper illustrations, the men are wearing uniforms and carrying Army-issue rifles. Unfortunately, that is artist license and not reflective of historical records. These men held off the Confederates until Union Navy gunboats could be deployed to their area and provide support from the water. Frederick Douglass's inclusion of these battles on this poster is to speak to the white people who might stop and read it, to remind them of Black valor and Black victories. The argument that Black soldiers were inferior to white soldiers had been made obsolete swiftly and decisively with these examples. In Mr. Douglass's own words, their bravery had silenced the tongue of calumny. Men weren't the only ones fighting for freedom. Many Black women joined battlefield hospitals as nurses and doctors and even surgeons. They were, in fact, prized commodities in mobile hospitals because many of them were former slaves and had extensive knowledge of alternative healing techniques. Welcome to the medical tent. The Buffalo Soldiers National Museum had a phenomenal reenactor who was not only a Civil War historian, but also a medical historian and current real-life surgeon. Here, we learned that since slaves were rarely granted access to doctors or formal medicine, they instead learned to rely on more pragmatic solutions, like herbal remedies. They learned how to set broken bones, reduce fevers, even treat infections holistically. As the war dragged on and supplies began to dwindle for both sides, Black women doctors were often shared between camps due to their highly specialized expertise. In fact, many Confederate doctors would sneak across enemy lines in the cover of darkness to meet with these Black women and learn how to treat their own patients. Because these women identified as healers and not combatants, they shared what they knew and saved many lives, Confederate and Union alike. These women doctors were typically given stewards, who were Union soldiers who would carry their medical equipment for them. Surgeons traveled with their own medical boxes, which would include bone saws and surgical sutures for tying off blood vessels. They could perform amputations start to finish, and that includes tying off the arteries and packing the wound, in under 8 minutes. I want to highlight the good doctor here and show you that everything she is wearing is handmade and appropriate to the time period, down to her corset and undergarments. Those stays are hand-tied, as are her surgical sutures. Both the apron and sleeves were part of the surgical attire. Cotton gauze was used for bandaging for as long as it was available. As the war progressed, however, and supplies dwindled, these women would reach down to their skirts and petticoats and tear off strips of their own clothing to stop the bleeding. These Black women are the unsung heroes of this war. Black soldiers also served in the role of chaplain in the Union Army. I want to call your attention now to the vestments of Henry McNeil Turner, the first Black chaplain of the United States Colored Troops, commissioned by Abraham Lincoln personally in Washington, D.C. in 1863. The spiritual life of the soldier is even more important than his physical equipment. The soldier's heart, the soldier's spirit. the soldier's soul are everything. It is morale, and I mean spiritual morale, which wins the victory ultimately. Following Robert E. Lee's surrender in Appomattox, Virginia, the Union Army was disbanded, and soldiers were allowed to return home to the families who had been so desperately missing them for so many years. All of the soldiers except for the United States colored troops. It was determined that military might was needed to force the southern states into the uneasy peace negotiated in Appomattox County Courthouse. The colored troops were sent south to Texas, Louisiana, Tennessee, every state that had rebelled. As prisoner of war camps were emptied of Confederate soldiers, these white men returned to southern cities now occupied by entirely black regiments who were there to protect peace and liberty. It went exactly as well as you can imagine. There were riots, destruction of black property, and mob justice. The Freedmen's Bureau was established following the war to help freed slaves integrate into communities, to build schools for black children, and to help black soldiers receive back pay and pensions, which were notoriously withheld or denied for racially motivated and entirely false reasons. Here in this illustration from Harper's Weekly titled Freedmen's Bureau, we see on the left a group of angry white men heavily armed. On the right, recently freed slaves. And standing between them, a black soldier wearing his Union Army uniform. You'll note he's the only one not armed. Instead, he holds one arm regally in front of him, the other calmly behind him, as he uses peace and not weapons to calm the rioters. This is the climate into which the Buffalo Soldiers were born. The United States Colored Troops was officially mustered out in 1866, while 6 new all-black regiments were formed. These were the 38th, 39th, 40th, and 41st, all infantry, and 2 cavalry, the 9th and the 10th. You'll notice how similar their uniform is to that of the Union Army. That's because it is. These had been mass-produced during the war and were, therefore, an affordable choice for the military. Horses were equipped with standard U.S. Army issue McClellan saddles covered in rawhide and outfitted with saddlebags and a metal stirrup system. Many Buffalo soldiers were former USCT veterans. These new regiments were deployed to Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona to protect the border from France, who had stationed troops along the border in an effort to secure Mexico under the French monarchy. They were sent to Kansas, Oklahoma, and Nebraska to construct new forts and protect the railroads. They worked heavily in Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana, providing security for new settlers expanding west, and to fight in the Indian Wars. And they were stationed in California, Louisiana, and Florida as early park rangers before there even was a national park system, and to provide relief during natural disasters. It is clear from the map that Buffalo soldiers played a vital role in American history and left an indelible mark on the country. The term Buffalo Soldier is recorded as early as 1870 and is believed to have originated with the Cherokee, though it was picked up quickly and became a widespread common name for all black soldiers. Historians speculate that this term may have referred to the soldiers' curly hair, or even to the buffalo hides they were known to wear during winter. However, many believe this was a term of respect, because these soldiers behaved with dignity and fought fiercely, aligning them with the buffalo, which was revered by many Native American tribes. If you'll remember, many of these soldiers had fought barehanded at Milliken's Bend, with inferior weapons and shoddy uniforms. They'd secured the battle at Port Hudson and returned the Mississippi River to Union control. And before that, they had survived years of slavery. These men were no strangers to hardship and did not shy away from difficulties. They were a form of frontier justice, hunting down cattle rustlers and horse thieves, as well as men trading weapons illegally with the Apache. They were tasked in moving Native American tribes onto newly created reservation territories and removing white settlers who attempted to build on those protected lands. This was, without a doubt, a difficult and often thankless job, and they participated in over 200 skirmishes in only 30 years, acting as the only barrier between those two parties. The Buffalo Soldier carried with him canteens for water and oil, as well as tinware, including plates, cups, and utensils. Dutch ovens and kettles were essential cooking items for open campfires, as were lanterns for lighting up campsites in the evenings. Most of what you're seeing here was forged from cast iron to survive the intensity of use directly in campfires and hot coals. Their weapons included the Colt Army revolver, also known as the Peacemaker, that chambered 6 .45 caliber bullets, as well as the Springfield rifle, a breech-loading single-shot rifle. These rifles fired rounds powerful enough to take down a horse. You'll also see here an officer's ceremonial sword, often worn with his dress uniform, but a deadly weapon nonetheless. During their tenure of service, the Buffalo Soldiers became known for exemplary behavior, both on and off the field of combat. While the regular army was battling a severe case of alcoholism across every division of their white troops, it was almost non-existent among the Buffalo Soldiers. They maintained consistently low desertion and court-martial rates compared to their white counterparts as well. Yet, despite being known as elite fighters, these soldiers were sidelined when the United States joined the First World War in 1917. Instead, the Buffalo Soldiers were sent to fight in the Philippines and in Cuba. Some were even sent to Hawaii to serve again in the national parks. As American death rates climbed, however, the military decided to expand its acceptance policies. New all-black troops were formed and sent overseas. The 92nd Division and the 93rd Division. The 92nd, though not technically a part of the Buffalo Soldiers, adopted an armband patch of a buffalo and called themselves that anyways, as a continuation of the legacy of black military service. Both units experienced discrimination nearly identical to the original freedmen serving in the Union Army. They were sent old, broken weaponry and old or incomplete uniforms. White soldiers refused to serve alongside them, refused to salute them, and would not follow their orders. General John Pershing, nicknamed Blackjack for his habit of continually advocating for equal treatment for black servicemen, decided to lend these units to the French Army, who did not care what color a man's skin was, as long as he served with honor. The French Army was so astonished by the valor and heroism of these black troops, they awarded multiple regiments in both divisions one of the highest medals in the French military, the Cross of War.
skies through the perilous fight. O'er the ramparts we once were so gallantly streaming.
Segregation continued into World War II, where black servicemen were trained separately, kept in segregated divisions, and even had separate blood banks for wounded men. Despite these inequalities, black men and women served with distinction. During this time, the Tuskegee Airmen trained the first black military aviators. The airmen were often tasked with protecting American bombers and earned the distinction of having fewer bombers lost than with any other escort group in the military. They received hundreds of medals, including the Distinguished Flying Cross, awarded for heroism during aerial flight. The 761st Tank Battalion, an all-black unit nicknamed the Black Panthers, also served with distinction. Their motto was, "Come out fighting," and that is exactly what they did, landing at Omaha Beach in 1944 and fighting in the Battle of the Bulge. They were assigned directly to General Patton's Third Army and quickly became known as some of the fiercest fighters in the war. They were frequently sent ahead of ground troops to punch holes in the Axis defenses, allowing infantrymen to pour through. These soldiers came home with new expectations, that they would be treated with the same freedoms and liberties for which they'd been fighting in Europe. And in July of 1948, the U.S. military was finally desegregated. The Buffalo Soldiers Museum continues to honor black servicemen and women in every branch of the military. This is Major Robert Henry Lawrence Jr., the first African American selected to be an astronaut. He served in the Air Force, first as a pilot, then as an instructor, and finally as a test pilot, where he was selected by NASA to go into space. His glide techniques, then only experimental, became foundational to the Space Shuttle program. Sadly, Major Lawrence never went to space, as he was killed during a test flight prior to launch. However, he has been honored posthumously by NASA as well as the Air Force. His legacy is continued today by astronauts like Victor Glover, who was part of the Artemis II crew headed to the moon for the first time in 53 years. In fact, he will be the first African-American astronaut to travel on a lunar mission. Like Major Lawrence, Captain Glover is also a test pilot. I thoroughly enjoyed my time at the Buffalo Soldiers National Museum, and without a doubt, it is one of the most rewarding things I got to do while visiting Houston, Texas. The amount of history being preserved in this building is awe-inspiring. I thought I knew a lot about the Buffalo Soldiers before, and this museum absolutely blew me away. If you decide to visit, and I hope you will, make sure to check their website and see if you can time your visit with one of their many community events. This space is so much more than a museum. Black military service isn't a thing of the past. It's an ongoing legacy of bravery, valor, and heroism in the face of daunting challenges and obstacles. And I, for one, am excited to see what's next and what exciting new exhibits and artifacts the museum will add in the coming years.